Hello everyone and welcome to online lecture 3. This will be discussing the anatomy of a research article. Now for some of you, if you have already read a number of research articles, this may be something you already know something about, but for some of you it may be brand new. So let's talk about it. Okay, so here's the breakdown of the different pieces of a research article. You have your abstract, your introduction, your method, your results, your discussion, and your references. Now in the syllabus, I already gave you a little bit of a sense for what these different pieces are, but we're going to talk a little bit more about it as we go forward today. Let's start with the abstract. It's a summary of the research report or article. It's 120 to 250 words or less, typically. Not always. I've seen abstracts that go up to 400 words. I typically haven't really seen much less than 120, but this is the typical length for an abstract. It includes the hypothesis, procedure, broad pattern of results, and implications. And so you might imagine you have to be pretty good at summarizing if you're going to get all that into 120 to 250 words, okay? Especially if the journal is one of the shorter ones and tells you you got to get it in 120 or even 150 words. It has to be really, really tight. It's typically the last part of an article to be written, and that's because you're summarizing all the other parts of the article. So you typically write it last. In some ways, some people consider it the most important part of an article, because think about if you've ever done a literature search, or if not, you're going to be doing one going forward. And the way it works is you're going to come up, let's say, with 60 articles. Well, you don't want to have to read 60 articles to figure out which ones are going to be most appropriate for your study. So what are you going to do? First, you're going to look at titles. Then you're going to look at the summaries, the abstracts, to help you decide if this article is a good one for your study. Okay. Next is the introduction. It includes past research and theories relevant to the problems described. And then it outlines the study to be investigated. And it gives formal hypotheses or specific expectations of the present research are introduced and connected to past research. So basically, this is a big part of why you would go and do a literature review, is to actually put together your introduction. What you're doing, in a way, I like to think of it as selling my methods. I'm going to show all the past research and theories that are related to my topic, right? So if my topic is, does classical music versus pop music improve people's learning of a list of words? Okay, let's say that's my research problem. I'm going to look up music and learning, and I'm probably going to see a whole bunch of different articles there, and I'm going to refine and refine until I get down to the right number that I think is appropriate for me to include my introduction. Okay, which for you guys will be a little bit smaller, but for a typical introduction, maybe 20, 25 articles, maybe 30, depends. And I'm going to tell a story about this past research and then outline how my study is a little bit different. What makes my study special? Why should you be interested and publish my study? Okay. And then, of course, getting into the formal predictions about my study. Okay, so that's your introduction. Now let's talk about the methods section, and this is research methods, so not surprisingly, we're really concerned about this section. The method section is the only section we're going to put subsections into, and the subsections depend upon the complexity of the design. But here are some potential subsections. Participants. What do the participants look like? How many are there? You can talk about different genders, different races, different ages, different socio-demographic characteristics you might include here. Overview of design. What kind of design did you actually use for your study? And we're going to talk more about design as we go forward. Equipment, testing materials, or measures. Okay, so some of you may have some equipment or that sort of thing. Probably a lot of you will have measures, right? So in my study, I have to have that list of words. I was going to have them memorized, right? And show where I actually obtained that list of words from, why it was a good list. Okay. Maybe in your study, you're going to look at something related to quality of life. So you'd have a quality of life measure that you would find out there. Then your procedure. And we're going to talk a little bit more about procedure when we talk about methods proper, but the procedure is where you are being very, very specific and telling people how to run the study exactly the way you ran it. In other words, if I read your procedures, I should be able to replicate your study. I should be able to understand exactly what you did at each step. And finally, an approach to a statistical analysis. What kind of analysis are you planning to use and why? Okay, so as I say here, a precise method section is essential for replication. Okay, if you don't have a good method section, someone else can't replicate your study, and you want people to replicate your study, right? Just like you might want to replicate someone else's study. Okay. Results section. The findings are presented in 3 ways. This is where you tell people about what you found in your study, your results. So first you're going to describe it in narrative form. Then you're going to describe it in statistical language. And then you're going to show it in tables or graphs, or both. Okay. So you might first say that the group that listened to classical music remembered significantly more words than the group that listened to pop music. Who knows, maybe it would come out the other way. And then you would describe it in statistical language by providing, in this case, probably your t-value, if you remember that from t-value for independent samples, if you remember that language. If not, don't worry, we are going to go over it later. And then you might show a bar graph showing each of the 2 groups and how they performed. Okay. Next, the discussion section. Here you're going to review the research from various perspectives, explain how the results compare with past results, and what are the implications and applications of your results. What do you think future research should look like? And what were your weaknesses and strengths? And you're going to embrace those weaknesses. So let me go through this a little bit in more detail. So what you're going to do is you might want to review your research, and this depends on the kind of research you're talking about, but you might want to review it from a learning perspective, as well as from a cognition perspective, as well as from a personality perspective even. So who knows? It just depends, right? You're going to explain how your results compare with past results. And the first part, is kind of dependent on the research. Like I said, you may not even get into much detail there. But the second part, you are definitely going to want to do, which is explaining how the results compare with past results. So remember, you did all this nice reviewing at the beginning in your introduction to show what past research has shown. Well, how do your results measure up? And what are the implications of your results? If you found that classical music was better for memorizing words, maybe you recommend that it's a great thing to listen to when you're studying. What are suggestions for future research? Maybe you wish you had a control group. Maybe you wish you actually had a third group that listened to no music at all and see how they performed. Maybe that would be a good idea for future research. And then finally, presenting methodological weaknesses and strengths. Maybe a strength of your study was that you had many, many participants. Your sample size was large. Maybe a weakness of your study, again, is that you didn't have that control group. But I don't want you to be concerned about weaknesses. I want you to just acknowledge them and embrace them because they gear you up for future research. Okay, so it's far, far better to just, show that you know what the weaknesses are. I was involved in one study some years back where we were trying to get it published, The lead author on the study kept saying there was an issue with the types of participants we gathered, and maybe it was a bit of a biased sample, and they kept coming back around that. And our lead researcher kept saying, like, no, it's okay because of this. No, it's okay because of that. And finally, the lead researcher said, you know what? You're right. It's really a weakness, but it's the only study we have out there that addresses the question. And then they said, okay, we accept it. We accept your paper for publication. So, like I said, it's a good thing to do this. Okay, I'll move on. References section, a list of all references cited or that you used in APA style. Okay, so you are probably going to use a number of references throughout this. In your methods section, you might have references for measures. In your introduction section, certainly you're going to have a number of references. Your discussion might even have 1 or 2 new references. You're going to put them all in a compiled nice list, like I said, in APA style. Okay. Is the article peer-reviewed? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what peer review means and what I keep talking about when I say publication and what does that mean. Okay, so each journal pages provides instructions to authors or submission guidelines and information about the peer review process. Okay, so all articles that are published by reputable journals go through a peer review process. So at a minimum, the article should be written by the researchers that conducted the study. I know that sounds silly. Of course, who else would write it? Sometimes it happens that someone else writes up the study and takes credit for work that they didn't conduct, and we'll talk about more of that in the ethics section. The article should include an abstract, introduction, methods, results, discussion, and reference sections. Now, I'm actually going to show you some articles that are brief reports and may not have all these sections, right? But in general speaking, this is what an article should have. Okay. All right. The editor and/or reviewers decide whether or not to accept the article for publication. So here's what happens. You send an article off, right? You've been working on it for years. You're really proud of it. You send it off. The editor gets it first and decides, okay, let's have some reviewers go over it. And it's sent on to reviewers that have knowledge or interest in the field, okay? So they should be kind of experts in your area. So they should really know a lot about learning and music. And they'll review your study and they'll give you some helpful feedback and tell you whether or not they think it's ready to be published at this point. And there's 3 choices. It can be either accepted on the spot, accepted with revisions, or rejected. And to be accepted on the spot is kind of rare. It's usually accepted with revisions or rejected, and you're hoping for accepted with revisions. That means you get to go back, work on it a bit more, and resubmit, and hopefully it'll be accepted at that point in time. Okay. The intended audience of these articles are scholars who have knowledge and or interested in the field. And articles are not written for profit. You don't get money for writing articles. It's not a money-making business. It's all for, a lot of schools, if you work at a university, would like you to publish a certain number of articles to show that you're keeping up with the research in the field. So people do it for that reason. People do it for the love of science. There's a number of reasons that people do research and publish, but it's not for profit. And this is a great thing for science, I think, because if it was for profit, then people would probably be publishing without necessarily following all the rules of science. And the fact that it's not for profit, I think, helps us as a field. Okay. Let's look at a couple of fun examples, and I have reasons for showing you each of the examples that I'm going to show you. The first one is, when you're coming up with an idea for your study in this class, I want you to make sure not to choose something that is so obvious that we know the answer before we even run the study. Okay, I want there to be a real question there that we don't know how it's going to come out exactly. You have your reasons, you have your hypothesis, but it's not a given how it's going to come out. Okay, so now I'm going to do this new share with you, hopefully, and show you an example of this. Okay, parachute used to prevent death and major trauma related to gravitational challenge. Systematic review of randomized controlled trials. Okay, so this is obviously kind of a joke article. As you can see, it was published in Hazardous Journeys. And they're saying, yeah, use a parachute to prevent death if you're going to jump out of an airplane or something like that, okay? And so, yeah, we kind of know parachutes are a good idea. We didn't really need this article. Okay. The next thing I'm going to encourage you about is to not necessarily think you have to use the biggest words in your vocabulary to communicate scientific findings. And so this article is called Consequences of Erudite Vernacular Utilized Irrespective of Necessity. Problems with Using Long Words Needlessly. So in other words, you know, I want you to write in a scholarly fashion, of course, but that doesn't necessarily mean reaching for the thesaurus at every moment and trying to find, you know, the most erudite vernacular, okay? You don't have to use large words. You don't have to necessarily, you know, go for those $5 words, okay? So it's more important to be clear and concise in this case, since you're doing posters, and get the ideas across. Okay. So here's another fun one for you. The unsuccessful self-treatment of a case of writer's block. And we all run into this problem. So this is my way of encouraging you not to leave things for the last moment, because sometimes you just run into writer's block, right? And you want to have time to get past that. So as you can see, this article is entirely blank, because they had writer's block. Okay, last one. Negative Land, a home for all findings in psychology. So this one I am showing you because what I'm talking about here is, what if your hypothesis does not turn out to be supported by the data, by your results, right? May not. And if that happens, I don't want you to worry. First of all, it does not impact your grade. I don't care whether or not your results come out positive or showing your hypothesis to receive support. And in fact, sometimes our negative results, when we don't find support for our hypotheses, sometimes they're just as helpful, just as interesting, just as useful as the positive results. So sometimes they're harder to publish. When you're, and again, you know, nothing we're doing in this class is really, we're not really talking about publication, but this is talking about the idea that, wouldn't it be nice if we had a good place to publish negative findings? And I completely agree with this. Even if your finding doesn't match up with the hypothesis, that doesn't mean it's not interesting, and that doesn't mean it shouldn't be published. So it's a problem in our field that we need to continue to work on. Okay, bring you back to examples. Here we go. So that's it for this lecture. If you have any questions about it, please feel free to come to the class where we'll be answering questions about it. And I'm going to give you an opportunity going forward to actually read some short articles and think through how you might concisely summarize those. So stay tuned for that. Other than that, be well, and I'll see you next time. All right, bye.